OVC. I was inspired by Chad over at Horror Biz. Hi, Chad. And Andrew at Tales from the Crate. Both of them have been making some Halloween videos. So I pulled some stuff to make my own. Both my dogs are eating breakfast in the background. So if that ruins the video, then I'll have to shoot another one. But so first up is Walt Disney's Chilling Thrilling Sounds of the Haunted House. This gets pulled out every Halloween. Sometimes it gets spun, sometimes it doesn't make it past the first side. But I mean, honestly, just as a physical artifact, just as a thing to have and to collect, between the artwork, the design, just it's just an artifact from another time, and it's just a record I enjoy having. It's if you haven't heard it, if you're not familiar with it, it's haunted sound effects basically, and it has a warning. This album will scare your socks off. Parental guidance suggested. I don't know. I just kind of love everything about it as a physical object, maybe more than for what's in the grooves here. But lots of good memories, and yeah, just a fun record. So this record really does get spun once every Halloween. This is the Haunted Mansion, the soundtrack to the Haunted Mansion. My wife and I went to Disney on our honeymoon, and the Haunted Mansion is easily our favorite attraction at Disney. Also, now living in California, we can get up to Disneyland every once in a while and ride it there. And for my money, the Haunted Mansion is it's the peak of something. One of the artists who was involved, Mark Davis, it was the peak of. It was him at the height of his powers. But it's peak Disney. It's peak theme ride. It's just everything good. Every time I ride the Haunted Mansion, I'm really thrilled that it's still there and relatively untouched. And this soundtrack is just a really fun thing to spin every Halloween. It's getting very expensive to pick up copies of this. This in particular is a mono copy. These purple labels, which I've noticed are a little more affordable. I know there's at least a couple that are not, sub $100 at least on eBay right now. But one lesson I think I've learned in the past few years, getting really serious about trying to get nice pieces for my collection, is patience just pays off so often. So I don't know necessarily what I'm getting at. Don't pay $200 for the Haunted Mansion soundtrack. You can still get them for 50 and 20 and 30 sometimes. Just got to be lucky. So this I pulled partially just because I was listening to it. This is the Smiths' Girlfriend in a Coma. But yeah, there's a darkness for me anyway associated with the Smiths and The Cure and a lot of 80s new wave, and but Morrissey's ability to mix kind of morbid subject matter and humor. It's just always been one of my favorite things about the Smiths, and it feels appropriate for Halloween, so thought I'd show it quickly. This is The Blackcoat's Daughter, the soundtrack to The Blackcoat's Daughter, which is one of my favorite recent horror films, directed by Oz Perkins, whose father is Tony Perkins from Psycho, and um, Oz's brother Elvis Perkins did the soundtrack to this movie. If you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend it. It's a great modern horror film. Kind of the type of horror film they don't make too many of anymore. And also just wanted to show it kind of to highlight Elvis Perkins, who's one of my favorites. His first album, Ash Wednesday, is being reissued in a week or so. And that album, I mean, literally starts as almost like a very traditional indie folk debut from the early 2000s. And unfortunately, halfway through recording the album, Elvis's mother passed away. She was on one of the planes in 9/11. And his father, Tony, had already passed of AIDS. So Ash Wednesday takes on a darker tone literally halfway through the album. And I think it's really informed the rest of Elvis's career. This record really feels like, I would say the heights, but the depths, maybe, of the despair that he's capable of exploring through his music. It's a great soundtrack. It's a creepy soundtrack. It's a very musical and very listenable soundtrack. It has something I really love, which is the use of a lot of real instruments. I think The Witch was another modern horror movie that had a very effective soundtrack, following the same kind of path. But yeah, Elvis's second album, Elvis Perkins in Deerland, is a really great record, much darker than the first, and one that I would definitely recommend at least giving a listen on Spotify. So Elvis Perkins, The Blackcoat's Daughter. And keeping it going with modern horror soundtracks, this is one for It Follows by Disasterpiece. It Follows is one of my favorite recent horror films. Came out in 2014. It's a polarizing film. If you're the type of horror fan that likes a lot of pop scares, you might not like this movie. If you're the type of horror fan who loves creepy ideas and atmospheric horror, then I would definitely recommend It Follows. And the soundtrack I recommend as its own thing. It's definitely kind of Carpenter worship, but in my opinion anyway, it kicked off the modern craze for kind of 80s throwback Carpenter style horror soundtracks. Personally, I don't think Stranger Things would sound like what it sounded like if this album hadn't come out before it. And one of the cool things is that Disasterpiece, who wrote the score, I think was a chiptune artist before music made on Game Boys, basically. So for me, there's a very satisfying kind of, it's a nondescript time setting. It doesn't feel like an 80s throwback, but there's a strange post Game Boy, post Nintendo crunch on this album, which I really, really enjoy, and which plays into the movie. They do little things in the movie to confuse you in terms of when this is set. It's like, by not nailing down the time period, it gets to happen anytime, which I think adds to the horror, adds to the atmosphere. So It Follows, highly recommended as a soundtrack, as a movie. And this is one of my favorite horror films, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. This is Dario Argento, of Suspiria fame. This is his first film, and it's a big movie for Italian giallo horror. This soundtrack was done by Ennio Morricone, and it's jazzy and it's scary, and It's listenable. It's very listenable. It's the type, even if it's not Halloween, I can put this on, and I won't get yelled at by my wife to have it turned off. We can both listen to it together. Um, yeah, it's a mystery, the film, and the music seems to ride an edge like that. On the one hand, some of these cuts are swinging 60s jazz, and on the other hand, they're creepy, eerie, get under your skin. Um, and now looking at this in the camera, I wonder if The Cure was influenced by it with this album cover. Um, but anyway, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. It's rare. It's harder to find, but you'll be able to find people who don't know what they have as well. So seek this one out for sure. All right. This is another one. Screamin Jay Hawkins. This just gets played every Halloween. This is a comp, an 80s comp, which I've seen multiple times for, right around $15, which is what I got this at, and it's a great price. It sounds great. Every time in my local that I see one of these go, the guy behind the counter makes a point to tell whoever's buying it what a deal they're getting. I've never seen an original Screamin Jay Hawkins anything, and I'm sure it would be expensive if I ever did. But this is a great album. I Put a Spell on You. He wrote and originated that song. His version is still hard to say definitive because the other people who have taken the song on are formidable, but there's kind of a holy trinity for me with that song. And yeah, I'll just let that lead me right into the next one. So I have already showed this album, but Them Again. It includes them covering I Put a Spell on You, and so it gets played every Halloween. I kind of start with the original and move through the covers. And of course, Nina Simone, I Put a Spell on You. A fantastic album. It's not necessarily so Halloweeny, but I don't mind putting on an album just to play a song. I like having, kind of a more DJ style turntable so that I can do things like that, and yeah. This gets pulled out at least once a year, more than once a year for sure, because I listen to it as an album in its own right. But on Halloween it gets pulled out, and I listen to I Put a Spell on You, and yeah. Now I'm sure you guys have this too, where you don't know why you make associations, but you do. This is one of those. Somehow listening to those versions of I Put a Spell on You just always leads me to the Zombies. I think there's some connection in my brain visually between the Them album and this Zombies album. But it's the name is the only thing about the Zombies that makes them Halloween appropriate, but that's not entirely fair. There's an eeriness to some of their sounds. The vocals are so hauntingly beautiful in some ways. But this is a European, I think an 80s collection of Zombies tracks. And it's got She's Not There and Tell Her No and The Way I Feel Inside. And yeah, it's just always fun for a listen. Somehow always finds its way out during Halloween, even if it's not explicitly a Halloween record. Now this certainly is a Halloween record. The Shining. there's not really much I can say. It's The Shining. Um, but I think what's cool about this record is this is scary music. Um, you know, this turns the house into a haunted house. This does kind of what the Disney record was promising to do, and it's got to be the right mood. You know, this is the type of thing that I could put on, and my wife would be like, "What are you talking about? This is not." But sometimes it's just right around Halloween. Kind of scare yourself with some truly scary music. Um, yeah, so The Shining, and these last two will be a little bit of a repeat, but whatever. Uh, Chad singled this out as his favorite Carpenter soundtrack. Um, I'm totally inclined to agree, partially because it's one of the ones that I own, but also it's a great soundtrack. Um, just there's a blend for me between the subject matter of the movie and the sounds of the soundtrack that doesn't necessarily work as well with any of Carpenter's other soundtracks. I think it's just the fact that the movie has that kids watching the TV and kind of being tricked by the commercial element. Um, that just associates really strongly in my brain with this kind of 80s technology, the synths and everything that they're using. There's a great, let's see if I can get it in here, great photo here on the back of Alan Howarth and Carpenter, you know, creating the soundtrack. Um, yeah, it's creepy, but it's super listenable. It's I mean, that It Follows soundtrack would just never exist without Carpenter's work on his own films. And yeah, Halloween 3, one of the more affordable of the Halloween soundtracks I've noticed to track down. I still haven't been able to track down one or two for a price that I can afford. But if you see 3, definitely grab it. And last, but certainly not least, is Suspiria, um, the Goblin soundtrack. Um, Goblin was, for anybody who doesn't know, um, an Italian band who did a lot of soundtracks for Italian film. I believe Argento plays with them on this one. This is a modern repress. One of the nice things, I don't know if you can see about the label Cinevox. Oh, this is horrible. Is that they tend to keep it constantly in being pressed, so it's pretty freely available. There is a crazy box set coming out, which I want but probably won't buy. But this is a soundtrack that it kind of hits all the it covers all the bases for me. It's perfect at Halloween. It is creepy. It is kind of scary. It's a little unsettling, but that doesn't stop me from bringing it out at other times of the year just to enjoy it as an album. It's deep. It's trippy. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have much else to add other than that. I love this soundtrack. I love the film. If either would be new to you, I highly recommend seeking them out. And yeah, Goblin, Suspiria. So there, those are my Halloween picks. It's the stack I'll be leaving out, trying to work my way through as we move into the holiday. So again, to everybody who's been supportive, thank you, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.